But I do believe that every case can be solved. How far are you willing to go? And so you've got to find a detective, and you've got to find an organization and a group of people that are willing to do that, because somebody knows something. I guarantee you, the waitress has told somebody, and the mother before they passed away told somebody. So there is a living person that knows what happened.
Welcome back to our CBS46 CSI Atlanta special. I'm Karen Greer. What started out as an innocent rite of passage, a makeout session on Lover's Lane, turned into a deadly crime spree. And even more alarming, police kept the public completely in the dark. 2 years before the horrific killings of more than 24 Atlanta children, a serial killer was tormenting young couples in Southwest Atlanta.
The first victims were found basically nude in almost sub-zero weather.
Very little was ever reported. Police intentionally leaving the media in the dark, says former Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Ken Willis.
If they talked about it, they would create a public panic.
Dubbed the Lover's Lane murders, 3 black couples were gunned down over a 3-month period inside their cars at 2 Atlanta parks. Then the killing stopped.
That to me is very telling.
The killer, only described as a large black man, remains free. CBS46 crime scene investigator Cheryl McCollum says a killer so brazen likely never quit.
It could be that he was dormant for 10 years, and then when he did move on or reoffend, it was in such a different way that we didn't notice they were connected at all.
Mac says to heat this case back up, we first start at the crime scene, Adams Park.
Well, in this case, you literally have to start from zero, which is where we are now.
On January 16, 1977, LeBrian Lovett and Veronica Hill were in the throes of romance when a man walked up to their car and started firing. Lovett managed to drive off before crashing into a bus stop sign.
The only thing that the female in the vehicle could state was she was shot by a friend of hers. Never provided a name, and subsequently both of those victims died.
Homicide Sergeant Raymond Layton says police eventually ruled out the victims' friends and ex-boyfriends. He's recreated the 42-year-old case files in hopes of solving it.
We never close a homicide.
Layton says detectives discovered a precise pattern of the crimes after the second shooting occurred 28 days later. The killer would strike continuously every month.
There were a number of stakeouts. Officers were pouring back over repeat offenders that lived in the area.
Denise Langston and Deetria Tatum survived several gunshot wounds and gave police a vague description.
These were poor lit areas, so the victims didn't see the assailant coming.
They were parked at West Manor Park, just 4 miles away from the first shooting. Ballistic testing linked the killer to all 3 shootings.
We know that the weapon was used was a .38 caliber Colt pistol.
A month later, Diane Collins and her fiancé were next when the killer returned to Adams Park. This time, he was able to open the car door and shoot, killing Diane instantly and wounding her fiancé. Layton says detectives are trying to track down stored evidence, including a blood sample belonging to the killer.
They were able to test that blood in 1977. You could only type blood. You couldn't get DNA profiles from blood.
Max says the killer has likely bragged about his crime.
They always tell somebody, always. So maybe somebody will come forward, it's worth a shot.
Now, Cheryl, this is one of the cold cases that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms asked to be reopened because she was a child when this happened, the Lover's Lane murders, and she remembers this well and wants to see some closure to this.
She's done a great thing here, Karen, bringing these cases back to light and asking people to look again. And as a native Atlantan, I remember this. I mean, people were petrified.
And this case, one that we actually went over to Atlanta Police, homicide detectives, and looked through the files. The files were different back then.
Yes.
You know, not as much information in there.
No, I mean, the narrative on a few of them were just a paragraph.
Right.
I mean, it's not a lot of information. But this case, you know, they didn't alert the public for a long time.
And that could have been a problem.
Probably. I mean, it's a two-edged sword if you're a chief of police. Do you alert the public to protect them, or do you alert later so not to cause a panic? I mean, it's a hard decision to make.
And quickly, where do you even start to move this case forward? We've been in contact with a family member. What do we do?
I think that was a good start, reaching back out to the families, because their memories are going to be solid, and they, again, have more information on the victims and what was going on at the time than we do, and more that's in the file. So that's the first place to start. I think secondly, again, you appeal to the public. Did somebody run their mouth in jail? Did somebody tell an ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife? you know, we just, again, plead to the public to come forward because they did tell somebody.
This won't be the end of this case for
Not
sure,
at all.
Cheryl. All right, when CBS 46 CSI Atlanta continues, a legal update that could change the course of a 70-year investigation into Georgia's last mass lynching and finally unlock the key to the killers.
I think Attorney Joe Bell represented it well. He laid out why the Moores Ford grand jury transcripts ought to be released to the public. You know, getting beyond all of the legalese, there is no compelling reasons why this historic, significant volume of history should not be available to the general public.
Welcome back. You're watching our CBS 46 CSI Atlanta special. You know, the #1 reason we're so passionate about cold cases is the families. This next cold case has haunted generations for more than 70 years. It's one of Georgia's most gruesome cases, and now an appeal to unseal the grand jury records could be the key to solving it and bring long-awaited justice. These bullets never disintegrate. It's a fact that could finally lead to answers in one of Georgia's oldest and most gruesome hate crimes, the lynchings at the Moores Ford Bridge.
Stab a white man.
It's a secret many members of an angry white mob took to their grave. America's last mass lynching. 4 black sharecroppers and friends, George and May Dorsey and Roger and Dorothy Malcolm. In a secluded area known as Moores Ford. May was 7 months pregnant. Now, 73 years later, the discovery of more than 100 bullet shells and casings found at the site by CBS 46 crime scene investigator Cheryl McCullum and her team could finally link the killers to the crime and bring long-awaited closure for the victims' families.
All they want is a slither of justice. They're not looking for a trial. They know they're not going to get it. They're not looking for an apology. They know they're not going to get it.
In 1946, Roger Malcolm is jailed for stabbing a white farmer he suspected of fooling around with his wife Dorothy. Days after his arrest, his boss, Lloyd Harrison, drives Dorothy along with George and May Dorsey to bail Roger out. Harrison takes the long way home that day. And as they neared Moores Ford Bridge, the car is blocked by a mob of 20 armed white men who drag them from the car, tie them up, and shoot each of them more than 100 times.
Miss Dorsey, and meet them at the bridge.
Mac has worked in criminal justice for nearly 40 years, but it's the cold cases that haunt her most, which is why she's spent the last 20 years solving unanswered truths.
There's a lot here. There's a lot of evidence here. There's a lot of history here.
It's unclear if this new evidence has even been tested or reviewed for leads. The FBI closed the case last year and refuses to answer our questions.
Well, then damn it, go do your job. That's all we're asking. Simple, easy. Can we test it? Is there anything that can be done now that wasn't done?
The FBI's initial investigation in 1946 identified possible suspects, but no one was charged. In 2007, the FBI revisited the site in Walton County and found little physical evidence. Mac and her team, including Atlanta prosecutor Holly Hughes, visited the site 3 years later and did some digging of their own.
Within 45 minutes, we had our first bullet. After the first day, we had about 30.
Eventually, they collected and turned over more than 100 bullets and casings to the FBI.
That tells you nobody looked in the first place, right?
Right.
That's a pretty obvious conclusion you can draw. And so how hard were they trying to solve it?
So is it possible to solve this crime?
Is it a long shot? Yep. Yes. But dadgummit, it's a shot.
Here's what we know. Shotgun shells went from cardboard to plastic in 1960, which means the shells Mac's team found at the scene, encased in cardboard, were made before 1960. People are gone, they're dead.
Right.
But how do we close this case?
You take that shell casing and you cross-check it against the shell casing from one of the weapons, and you see if you can't match it up. And then you go back to that family and say, hey, you know what? You gave us this, it does match up. What story do you know?
Joining Mac and I now is Atlanta attorney Holly Hughes. Holly, thanks for joining us. What would unsealing these grand jury records mean for this case?
Would mean everything, because you would know who testified and what evidence was put forward. Remember that grand jury proceedings are secret, and for a very good reason. At that point, it's an investigative body looking to see, is there enough evidence to charge someone? So if the police got it wrong, if this is a mere accusation, you don't want somebody's good name ruined because they were investigated. So the secrecy is a good thing in our society. However, after 70 years, when no one else is working this case, it's about time to unseal those records. It is historical, and that is one of the reasons why it should be unveiled, is for the history of Georgia. This was, as you said, the last mass lynching. And if we can find out what was in those records, we'll know who testified, what evidence was put up, and we can track those people down or track down their relatives. Because if they had enough to tell a grand jury, they told it to somebody sitting in their living room.
And what happens if they're not unsealed?
If they're not unsealed, we are where we started with all of those ballistics, all of the evidence that we gathered. I mean, boots on the ground gathered. This isn't some theory that 50 years ago somebody put something in a bag. We physically went out there with a bunch of volunteer college students and picked up those shell casings. So we are back to the forensics if we cannot get those records unsealed.
And Cheryl, you were out there with your students, really boots on the ground, as Holly said, finding all those shell casings. What more can we do in this case?
I think it's imperative that we look at what was found in the ground and cross-check that with what people have said. Karen, there are still people alive that have vital information. So if this record is not unsealed, we hadn't lost anything. We hadn't had it in 70 years.
Now, one attorney said the key to getting this case solved is getting a strong district attorney behind us to really help us push this. Do you guys agree?
Agree.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
We need a secret grand jury right now. And you don't have to make it public, but give it to the people and let them decide.
Is there somebody out there that still has an old relic of a gun that they know might have been used that day?
Of course there is. Of course there is. Men don't throw away their guns. Southerners pass those things down. It's a tradition. It's in the hope chest with the baby quilt. Those guns are still in the family. They could be tested and returned to the owner, returned to the rightful owner. And remember, there was an eyewitness there who was very young at the time, who is still living. And if that person would be willing to come forward in a secret proceeding, they might feel a little more comfortable giving up what they know.
And Cheryl, you guys know who that is.
Of course.
We do.
So what do? Do we try and convince them to even go forward themselves?
Again, it needs to be from the DA's office.
Okay. Not us making a phone call, tracking that person down.
We can certainly track them down, and we can certainly encourage them to make the call to come forward. But again, it has to come from the DA if this case is going to be moved at all.
If you want answers, Karen, then yes, we call him. If you want justice in a court of law, then we get the district attorney to call him.
Right
and
on.
those are the two differences.
All right, we're going to work on that as well, guys. Thanks.
Thank
Stay
you.
with us. How a phantom caller could hold the key to one of Georgia's most notorious cold cases, and CSI Atlanta's connection to this caller, and how we're one step closer to cracking this case. A mysterious caller could change everything in two of Atlanta's most notorious cold cases. The murder of Diane Shields and the disappearance of Mary Shotwell Little. The cases have fascinated Georgians for decades, and for the first time, a link in the case breaks their silence, moving CSI Atlanta closer to solving this case.
No matter who talks about Diane Shields, this person contacts them almost immediately.
Sandy Webb didn't hear his voice until recently. For 50 years, he called on the day Mary Shotwell Little disappeared and the day Shields was found murdered. Both were her friends. The caller
never say anything.
Until one night, he said something that shook Webb to her core.
It's when he said to me, well, I guess she was just stringing me along, huh? Now, I may have misinterpreted that, but to me, that sounds like I'm pissed.
She immediately called CBS46 crime scene investigator Cheryl McCullum.
Sandy made it clear that her phone number was unpublished.
How did he get this number? Because it's not listed in my name.
The person that located that phone number did an internet search that was exhaustive.
But I didn't have the landline on there. Something about
For the
it.
first time in 54 years.
And we were in our 20s, you know, it just...
Webb talked exclusively to CBS46 about their friendship.
I've never talked publicly about this. But when I found out it was you and my dear friend, Cheryl Mack, if I can help, I want to help.
Although Little and Shields never met, they were linked by coincidence. One of them being Webb, who lived with each one at different times.
They were two fantastic people.
It was right here at this intersection of Cleveland Avenue and Sylvan Road where Shields' body was found stuffed in the trunk of her car.
Whoever put her car here was concealing her. They weren't hiding her.
Can we say this person has already contacted us as well?
Absolutely, I think it's important.
The caller reached out to us here at CBS46. He told us he used to date Shields, and he gave us intimate details that are only in the case files that CBS46 has exclusive access to.
You know, hopefully he'll reach out again, and hopefully he'll want to meet.
Now, Cheryl, a mystery caller actually reached out to us, someone familiar with this case. Talk about this.
It was fascinating. We get a call after the first episode aired, wanting to speak to you because they had knowledge of this case and specifically knew Diane Shields and Mary Shotwell Little.
And this is the same person who had spoken with the roommate.
Yes.
Who spoke to us for the very first time.
Absolutely.
So do we really think this person knows a lot about this case?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind. He's got information that nobody else has. He would know, did Diane lock her doors when she drove? Did she drive with her shoes off and put them in the back seat? He's going to know that for sure.
And I need to add, we are still trying to, get it all together. We've been emailing and missing each other on voicemail, but Atlanta police also have talked to him before.
Yes, he's not unfamiliar with anybody that's worked this case. But again, the fact that he's reached out to you is key.
This case, one that has haunted Atlanta for quite a while.
Oh, yes.
Because of the similarities and the connections with these two women. Where are we with this right now, Cheryl?
The most important thing is if we can solve Diane Shields, we will by proxy be able to solve Mary Shotwell Little.
All right. When we return, there's more than one way to learn more about Georgia's coldest cases. Coming up, we're going to take a deeper dive with some of the key players in these cases in CSI Atlanta, the podcast. Coming up, a look behind the scenes at some of our favorite interviews.
I don't know how
how much hope I have that we'll ever get to the bottom of it or bring somebody to justice, but I can't live with myself if I don't try to do something. Just try.
If you've enjoyed our CBS 46 CSI Atlanta special, you'll want to tune in to CSI Atlanta, the podcast. Hear myself and Mac take an intimate look at the cases we're working. Check it out. There are killers hidden among us.
It takes one person. It takes one person.
I just want some justice.
Let that marinate for a minute.
I also believe he's told someone.
Oh my God.
Just another murder in Atlanta.
There are secrets kept for generations.
That community has got to come forward. They've got to start talking. And that's what it is on most of these cases. Somebody knows.
Right?
There are mysteries unexplained.
All of it's missing.
To this day, I don't know what happened to the evidence.
The murder doesn't end with the murder itself. The murder only ends when the offender stops gaining satisfaction from it.
As many people that were there, somebody told somebody something.
And you're listening to CSI Atlanta, the podcast. I'm CBS 46 anchor Karen Greer. Each week, I'll be examining some of the coldest cases in Georgia with the help of CBS 46 crime scene investigator Cheryl Mack McCullum. We're taking you to the crime scenes, to the laboratories, to the warehouses full of police evidence to find answers. And we're asking for your help in each case. This is CSI Atlanta, the podcast. We hope you'll download our CSI Atlanta podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And I need to take a minute to say, Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure and joy working with you on these cases.
Oh, it's been my honor, Karen. And I just have to say, as good as she is on camera, y'all, she is better off camera. The love and advocacy that she's shown to every single family member has been extraordinary.
And Cheryl, you know, we can't solve these cases by ourselves.
No question.
All right, we need folks to help us out. So thank you so much for tuning in to our special CBS 46 CSI Atlanta special. We're going to continue to follow these cases and keep you updated with any new leads, as well as bringing some new cases we're working on. If you have any information that could bring closure to some of these families, we want you to contact Crime Stoppers 404-577-TIPS, 404-577-8477. Tell me you saw this on CSI Atlanta. And not only could you end up with some money for helping solve the case, you could help those families looking for much needed closure. Help us keep advocating for the victims and their families.